Welcome to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. We're applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day so that you can connect the eternal with the everyday and get ready to head out into the world that God so loves in ways that honor Jesus. So let's get started. This is The Reconnect.
Inspiring you to bring God back into the conversation of the day.
This is The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms out wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power, we will go. By your spirit, we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
It's summertime. Oh, I already, out of the gate, got it wrong. It's summertime. Anyway, hi, I'm Paul. Carmen's on vacation this week. I'll be filling in. Thanks for listening to The Reconnect here on Faith Radio. Of course, with summertime, picnics. Got any big picnics planned this summer? Got to tell you a story. I was at a picnic many years ago, and there was an abundance of food of all sorts. We had the chips, we had the dips, we had the salads of all sorts, and we had those main course things, the burgers and the brats. And if you're from the South and don't know what a brat is, because there are some people who don't, just think of a big, spicy hot dog. That's pretty much it. But anyway, along with all those things, there were desserts. Lots and lots and lots of desserts. When it was time to eat, most everyone dove into the chips, the salads, the main dishes, but not Connor. By the way, it's not his real name. But Connor dove right in for the desserts, and lots of them. His plate was mounding with desserts. We asked his mom if she saw what Connor was eating right out of the gate. And she said, well, that's just Connor, and pretty much that's Connor all the time. He wouldn't eat much of anything else. And she was totally resigned to letting him eat whatever he wants. Otherwise, he would complain incessantly. Now, the rest of us were concerned for Connor. We were concerned about why his parents were handling the situation the way they did. And we were concerned about Connor's overall health as well. I mean, that's not good. Okay, I get it. We're at a picnic. And eating what you want, indulging occasionally, that can be okay. But sweets were essentially Connor's diet, his entire diet. And his parents weren't concerned enough to be the parent, as some would say, and help do something to help change that for Connor. Now, me, growing up on the farm, I was part of a large farm family, and my mom did what she could to provide food, made food for us. Oh, yeah, we had sweets. We usually would have a big pan of brownies when we came home from school, and with 9 kids, we could polish that off. No trouble. But dinner time was different. Dinner time was dinner time, and she did what she could to make healthy stuff, whether we liked it or not. And, okay, sometimes we didn't like it, and we would refuse to eat. Mom would say, well, like it or lump it. Now, I never was really quite sure what lump it meant, but essentially it meant this is dinner. If you don't like it, you can wait until breakfast. Now, don't worry, my mom would always, if we would refuse to eat something, she would hold out a serving for us. So when the hunger pains got us later, we could eat. If not, well, breakfast was in the morning. She was teaching us to trust her, that she knew better than us what would sustain us in the long haul. And as kids, we can let our desires overrule what will truly benefit us. Actually, as adults, we can do that too. Struggling to know what is good, what's truly good for us. Our Growing Your Faith verse for today, Deuteronomy 8:3. Yes, he humbled you by letting you go hungry and then feeding you with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. He did it to teach you that people do not live by bread alone. Rather, they live by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. All right. That comes from Deuteronomy, a very interesting book because the name means second law. Really, it's a sermon or a series of sermons Moses delivered to the young generation of Israelites. They were about to cross the River Jordan into the promised land, the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to them as home for the people of Israel. This generation grew up during the 40-year wanderings in the wilderness. Deuteronomy's sermons are basically a summary of their history of gaining freedom from their bondage in Egypt, the God's law being given to them, making them a people, and a call to follow and trust God as he takes them into the land. The previous generation, their parents, who were brought out of Egypt, had a big problem. Yes, God delivered them out of Egypt, but there was still a lot of Egypt in them. One area was that, well, the foods that they desired and they missed a lot. One would, it only was augmented by the fact that food was kind of scarce in the wilderness. But God did provide. Okay, maybe not what they wanted, but it was there to sustain them. They had quail meat every night, and in the morning the ground was covered with manna, that bread from heaven. Although manna was said to taste like wafers of honey, and who doesn't like a little bit of honey, it was a rather limited diet. Bland quail in the evening, manna in the morning. Bland quail, manna. Bland quail, manna. That's it, day after day. Sustaining, yes. Satisfying? Maybe not. There was a song some years ago by the late Keith Green that encapsulated this problem called "So You Wanna Go Back to Egypt, Eating Leeks and Onions by the Nile. Ooh, what breath for dining out in style." Okay, they also had pots of meat that they got from the Egyptians. They were fed well. After all, they had to work. But again, here they were in the wilderness. Bland quail, meat, and manna. I mean, you could do some cooking with the manna. Manna waffles, manna burgers, banana bread. Okay, that's from the Keith Green song again. But you get the point. It was boring. Why would God do that? It wasn't about the food only. It was about trust. God provided, yes, the food, but ever so much more. Yes, water in the wilderness where there seemed to be no water. A cloud by day to protect them from the sun, a pillar of fire by night. He delivered them from the Egyptian armies. He did this simply by a word of his command. And even as the generation of the Exodus continued to grumble and complain and rebel, God continued to provide what would sustain them. He continued to be faithful. Back to the sermon in Deuteronomy and today's Growing Your Faith verse. It's a verse that calls us to understand God's bigger plans and care. It's a verse that Jesus knew so that when he was tempted by the devil in the wilderness after his baptism and then that time of fasting in the wilderness, was he going to trust his heavenly Father to provide, or was he going to take a shortcut? The devil saying, "Oh, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Something he could easily do. But anytime you're tempted by the devil, remember his purpose is to break your reliance on God. So how did Jesus respond? With this verse, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." As Jesus did, are you willing to trust God's timing on things, his ways, his thoughts, even if some of your desires need to take a back seat? Well, again, thanks for listening to The Reconnect without Carmen this week here on Faith Radio. Hope she enjoys her time of vacation with her sister. I'm Paul, and okay, here we are. Today's day 1 of June. We're in June now. June is many things. Dairy Month. It's also Men's Health Month, Great Outdoors Month, and it's also Pride Month, with many celebrating lifestyles based on so-called sexual identity. Many in these groups, in looking for ways to justify such lifestyles, will talk about how the Judeo-Christian sexual ethic is too restrictive. And besides, before the church became powerful, if you look back at the ways of the ancient Greeks and Romans and how they lived, they had these alternative lifestyles. Okay, the ancient people did do these things. And if they did them, so can we, right? Do they have a point? Do the people justifying things based on that have a point? Well, coming up in about 90 seconds, I'll be joined by Nadya Williams here on Faith Radio as we look at the history of all this. Well, again, I'm Paul. Thanks again for listening to The Reconnect here on Faith Radio. Yes, Carmen's on vacation. I'm Paul, filling in. Thanks for listening to The Reconnect this Monday on Faith Radio, first day of June. You know, as Christianity spread, the biblical Judeo-Christian principle of the Imago Dei, that humans, male and female, are created in God's image, Wherever Christianity, the Christian faith took hold, in many ways it shaped aspects of the social life of the people, politically, economically, and in the area of human sexuality, to be sure. I don't think we can say it was ever perfectly kept wherever Christianity became the majority religion, but it did have its effects. Since the so-called sexual revolution of the 60s and after, as large groups of people rebelled against the so-called traditional sexual ethic, they would sometimes point out that sexual practices that predated Christianity, many of those were similar to what they were wanting, the sexual freedom, as they would call it. Will it actually bring them freedom? What was believed back before Christianity in the West? And what was the fruit of those beliefs? To talk about that, you need to talk to a historian, and we do have one, Nadya Williams. She's also a homeschool mom, an editor based out of Ashland, Ohio. And she's part of Ashland University, married to David K. Williams, who we've talked to a few times here on the Reconnect. So it's kind of nice to have Nadya back on because it's been a while. And, you know, Nadya, it's like you and your husband, you're like a dynamic duo.
Thank you. And because it's 7 a.m., it's Daniel K. Williams.
Oh, yes,
David.
Daniel K. Williams.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's early.
It is early. It is. Well, it's 6 o'clock where I am at, so it's even.
Oh.
And I've not had my full cup of coffee yet.
Ooh. Well, thank you for having me. It's always a delight to talk to you. You're one of the few people I'd definitely get out of bed for this early.
Wow, that's awfully nice to say. I'll pass it along to Carmen because it's, her too. But anyway,
exactly,
you're the author. A couple of years ago, she actually talked to you about this, mothers and children and the body politic. And in that, I mean, it's a pretty big book, but you do get into the history of things before Christianity really took hold in the Greco-Roman world in Europe and such. So help us then. Help us look back at the cultural practices around the the Greco-Roman world, especially around human sexuality. And do you see parallels to the practices from the sexual revolution and what many people in progressive LGBT movement are now advocating for?
Absolutely. And I do see parallels, but they're not the liberating sort of encouragement that I think these people are appealing to when they mention the ancient world. So sexual practices in the ancient world were extraordinarily abusive. It was all about power in relationships. And so for men to have relationships with other men, it really usually entailed someone with a lot of power, using someone much younger and socially inferior to essentially get prestige of sorts, depending on the time period. But a lot of times also this involved people who were enslaved. So you have someone who was literally bought with money and had no control over it. One of the few Roman novels to survive in any sort of state, the Satyricon, and it hinges on this. The story opens with this wealthy man who is traveling with his lover, but then we realize this lover is actually a slave. And it gets really kind of gross when you're reading this with 21st century eyes and you realize, like, this guy, the lover in question has absolutely no say in anything that happens to him. This is not the liberation we're looking for. But, that's the parallels that as Christians, we can look at the sort of relationships that people now are advocating and are saying, like, well, this is what it means to be liberated. But does it actually bring true happiness to anyone? And considering that mental health issues among the LGBTQ, whatever other acronyms you add, population are through the roof, I think there is something there. There are a lot of questions that I have about this. I would say the parallel really to the Roman world is that this is still very abusive, even though the people who are participating in this abuse are saying, like, well, I gave consent and consent is the language. This is extraordinarily abusive. What was so revolutionary about the Judeo-Christian ethic, and really especially in early Christianity, as the church really talked about it, it held both men and women to the same strict standard of sexual purity. And what it showed was an extraordinary respect for both men and women's bodies, regardless of whether you were wealthy or not, aristocrat or not, everybody, precisely because of that Imago Dei, you were priceless. You are priceless in God's eyes. And therefore, it matters what you do with your body. And it matters what others do with your body, because your body belongs to God.
Mm. Nadya, I have an interesting question. I don't know if you got into this book, in your book, but we're basing a lot of this off of the Imago Dei, which finds its roots in the biblical account. God creating man in his image, male and female, he created them. And the way the story has it, if you go to Genesis, as we should, it shows humanity kind of being that pinnacle. After man was made, instead of just God saying, this is good, this is very good, there's something beautiful here. Now, what about the creation stories of the other, like the Greco-Roman world or the Egyptian world or like that? Because my understanding is it doesn't have that high a view of humans.
No, and I think that's a really important point to consider as well. And sometimes it has a higher view of men being created than women. So in Greek mythology, the first woman really is Pandora. And so that's where we talk about Pandora's box, which was originally Pandora's jar. Some things get lost in translation. But the idea of the first woman being created as a way for Zeus, king of the gods, to punish people for essentially not worshiping him enough. So you have that. And then you have the Near Eastern creation stories where mashed up blood and tendons of one deposed early god become like molded into the first human. And gods kind of laugh at this and talk about how, well, now we'll have slaves who do our pleasure. And never in Genesis do we hear God say, oh, I made slaves for me. It's always, these are made in my image. They are precious. So this preciousness standard that whenever we disrespect our bodies, this is what it means to, like, it's disrespect for God as well, precisely because our bodies are meant to be precious and priceless.
Yeah. We're talking with Nadya Williams from, Ashland University, also with Mere Orthodoxy, among other publications. You're quite a busy person. When we continue, Jesus said, you will know things by their fruits. You will know a person by their fruits. And I think we need to look at that, because oftentimes you get caught up in our ideology and we don't really see the fruit of our beliefs, and we need to step back and look at them. So we're going to look at that a bit more in just a few moments as we continue talking with Nadya Williams, author of Mothers, Children, and the Body Politic. Thanks again for listening to The Reconnect on Faith Radio.
Just take the first step. Just take the first step. I mean, every journey begins with a first step, right? And if you want to hike to the top of a mountain, or if you just want to, make it around the block, it all starts with a first step. Just take one step, a step out the door. Now, the same holds true in the journey of discipleship with Jesus. A relationship with Jesus actually begins with a first step. Sometimes taking that first step can be really hard, right? Well, if you've got questions about what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus, just take the first step. Text the word faith to 41224. Our friends at the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association are going to hold your hand as you take the first step or the next step in your walk of faith with Jesus. They're going to help you walk with him and talk with him. Take the first step of faith today. Text the word faith to 41224.
Okay, there's a lot of ways to know what a tree is, but one of the best ways is what fruit does it bear? What fruit? You go to an apple tree, you're going to get an apple. You go to a cherry tree, you're going to get a cherry, right? Eventually, it'll show. Hey, I'm Paul. Thanks again for listening to Faith Radio. Jesus often used the phrase, by your fruits you shall know them. And in the modern world, because we still deal with various things, including various movements and belief systems, look at the fruit of what it produces. It may look kind of good at the start, but okay, we're talking with Nadya Williams, again, author of Mothers, Children, and the Body Politic. And as we start out what's called Pride Month by many, What is the fruit of such lifestyles? And we've been looking at the ancient world before Christianity really took hold and talking about the practices of that time frame. And Nadia, you were talking a bit about when it came to men who had control over guys, other guys for sexual purposes and such. Let's back up a bit more and look at what was it like for women and children in that world, in the ancient world? Because again, what was the fruit of the belief systems that they had?
It was quite terrifying. So when you look at ancient literature, so starting with the epic poems of Homer, what are all the Trojan women and children terrified of? And what we see is the women know if their city is defeated, they will all be enslaved, so sold into slavery to be concubines, slaves for others. The children, the boys will be killed. The girls will also be sold into slavery. And of course, all the men of the city would be killed. And that was typical for at the end of any ancient war, really. But even for women who are in your society, so say women who were not, traumatized by being captured and sold into slavery as a result of a war, what we see is a very low view of women and of mothers. So there's the question where today you'd think we kind of take it for granted that it is mothers who carry the baby, give birth. They're mothers, right? Mm-hmm. That's you have two parents, a father and a mother. Well, so there was one way of thought, and we get some of this in the concluding play of Aeschylus's Aristeia, the Eumenides. The theory that is proposed is a mother is not actually a parent to the child. She's just a container. The father is the one who creates the child. The mother is just a, temporary container that holds it and brings it to birth. Great. But she doesn't really deserve any credit for it. And we get some of this also slightly later in Aristotle with his theories of what exactly happens when a baby is made. So these kinds of disrespectful things show a very low view of women, and it's almost it almost raises the question, well, actually does raise the question, like, why did anyone get married when they thought this was so unnecessary? But I guess at some level, obviously, they did think it was necessary. But you have a very low view of women, of marriage, and of children. A lot of children died pretty young, infancy, depending on what estimates you look at, different archaeological estimates, which are not very precise, but we're still talking probably over 50% before age 5 or something like that. So this was a very difficult world to live in. But for the weak, it was especially so. For whenever we talk about mothers and children, we're talking about the weak. And that's the question with any society. How does it treat its weak? And Christianity, for the first time, proposed this language of the weak are just as precious in God's eyes as the strong. And that has implications for how you treat them.
It does. Let's fast forward to the modern era. I mean, how are we seeing the fruit bearing out, at least as you can see it right now, because of the sexual revolution and after that? And there's some people who say, well, okay, we don't believe all that stuff that the Greeks and Romans did. We're kind of got the fruit of the Imago Dei, but they don't want to align with the design God had that goes with the Imago Dei. What fruit are we seeing right now that should have us concerned?
We're seeing a lot of misery. The society-wide mental health epidemic is definitely not good. So when we look at that when we look at what's different about our society, and you could say like, well, some of these things are coincidental, but I'm wondering like which of these things are all working together. We're also looking at a crisis of isolation. So many Americans who live alone, who have no friends, who have no close contacts, people who defer marriage or just never get married by their choosing, never have children because they think children will make them miserable. And when you look at people like that, the vast majority are actually really miserable people. Whereas the happiest people I know, and really statistics bear this out, are parents with children, like families. Obviously, not every family is going to be joyful and happy, but a lot of families are because you have each other. You have this, you have other people with whom to do life. And really, we're going right back to God's proclamation. It is not good for man to be alone. And I think it applies, yes, of course, it applies to marriage, but it really applies to family, community, friendships, and all of these things that are so important that a lot of times people who decide not to have family relationships, ironically, also disconnect themselves from so many of these other.
I never thought of it that way, but yeah. So, well, Nadya, thanks again, and I highly recommend people check out your book, Mothers, Children, and the Body Politic. It's from 2 years ago, but definitely a good read on this area and more. I did want to take a few moments, so we got about like a minute and a half. You're the books editor at Mere Orthodoxy and the host of the Christians Reading Classics podcast. Summer's here, Nadya, and I'm always good for a good book recommendation for summer reading. What's on your mind as of late?
Well, so for Christians Reading Classics, our motto is read old books for a new world. You know, yes, there are really good books coming out right now, but you know what? You can never beat an old book. And by old, it can be 100 years old. It can be 2 millennia old. But the point is, read books. Don't let your brain rot over the summer. And so on the podcast, we're having great conversations about especially American classics, because we're thinking about America 250.
Oh, yeah.
So we're thinking like, what books should Americans read in honor of America 250? So I'll have an episode coming up soon on Nathaniel Hawthorne. How many of you grew up reading Nathaniel Hawthorne?
I tried to
Last
avoid
of the
reading.
Mohicans?
I hate to admit it.
Sorry, not Nathaniel. Sorry, I'm
Nadya. It's like I was terrible.
I'm confusing multiple authors.
No, that's fine. I was just I'm trying to catch up in my later years because in high school I hated American Lit. I know that is probably offensive to you like crazy. I just never got into it, and now I'm starting to think I got to get into it. You know.
Absolutely, yes. So Nathaniel Hawthorne, Scarlet Letter, but which I know has a rough reputation from high school, but also so thinking of earlier adventure books like Jack London and so on.
I like London.
See, exactly.
There's
a
Perot mentioned in his book, Call of the Wild. So anyway, we got to get moving here. I have another guest coming in, but Nadya, thanks again for joining us here on The Reconnect. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. Okay, I'm Paul filling in for Carmen. Thanks again for listening to Faith Radio. And coming up next, when you're a citizen, you have certain benefits and responsibilities. When you become a dual citizen, well, you have the benefits and double the responsibilities as well. What happens when those citizenships collide? Now, as Christians, we live in that problem every day, being citizens of an earthly nation, but also our citizenship in God's coming kingdom. How do you live in that tension? Daniel Bennett joins us in about 3 minutes. He's the author of Uneasy Citizenship, a regular guest of ours here on The Reconnect. I'm Paul filling in for Carmen. This is Faith Radio. Well, again, I'm Paul filling in for Carmen on The Reconnect this week here on Faith Radio. And this year, the U.S. celebrates its semi-quincentennial. Big way of saying it's our 250th birthday as a nation. But the Declaration of Independence is what founded it. And some have said that unlike many nations before our time of the U.S. was founded not on the basis of a particular people group, language, culture, something like that. It was birthed out of an idea or a set of principles, and around the idea of citizenship as part of it. Well, 250 years later, are we living up to the idea of citizenship, even when it's not easy? Oh, well, that brings up a thought. Joining us right now, as he does every couple of weeks, is Daniel Bennett, who is of many things the author of a book called Uneasy Citizenship. Daniel, thanks again for joining us here on The Reconnect.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Well, let's start right there because as I was talking about the whole idea of citizenship, even when it's uneasy, and your book about uneasy citizenship. Now, we've talked about it before, but can you give a quick elevator pitch about the book and the idea you're really trying to put forward in it?
Sure. So I'm writing the book as a political science professor, someone who has studied for quite a long time the American political system, political behavior, challenges to effective and certainly faith-inspired political behavior, political polarization, challenges for institutions, lack of trust, etc. And acknowledging that there are real challenges in our current political system for people of faith, particularly those of us who find ourselves maybe increasingly in a position of a cultural or even political minority. But at the same time that there are these challenges, there's also a lot of opportunities for us to live in a faithful, hopeful way as we approach this 250th anniversary of our country, and almost leaning in to a sort of an uneasy and tension-filled understanding of what it means to be a Christian citizen. So that's my charge. It's acknowledging that there are challenges and it's not all going to be easy, but there are real opportunities for us as people of faith to be good witnesses for the gospel at this particular moment in time.
Okay, you leaned in on the word uneasy in the title. I'm going to lean in for a little bit, though, on the idea of citizenship. And it is different, like I said, from what people thought before the time of the founding of the U.S. in many cases. Not that there weren't citizens, the Romans had citizens and such, but the idea of citizenship, why is that important? What is that?
Well, in the grand scheme of history, it's a relatively new idea. Right before we got started talking off the air, you'd mentioned there's a distinction between subjects and citizens, and I think that's a really important distinction. Subjects don't really have a lot of say in the matter, right? You are a subject of a kingdom if you are governed by a king or a warlord or someone who just has a sort of control over a geographic area. You have really no say in that matter. Being a citizen implies a sort of ownership or responsibility even to the political system. And in our country, of course, we do have a say, not necessarily in the day-to-day writing of laws or policies that are enacted, but certainly in the elections of those officials who write those laws, certainly in the sort of political environment that we foster for those elected officials. And so citizens, I think, there is a lot more buy-in, responsibility, and action associated with being a citizen rather than just merely being a subject going along with the whims of whatever king happens to be in charge.
I keep thinking of that picture, and it looks Norman Rockwell-ish, but it's just an average-looking guy standing up, saying his thought at a community meeting. He has some sort of pamphlet in his pocket. I never looked at
it. Is a Norman Rockwell. It is a Norman Rockwell.
It is.
It is, yes.
Yeah, and it's just, okay, the average Joe, the average guy has a say in direction. And here we are.
And historically, that's very unusual historically.
It is. And so we've had that. Do we still have that? Here we are 125 years from the Declaration of Independence. How do you see the call to citizenship being compromised?
Well, certainly, I think the responsibilities that we have under our political order and our Constitution, the principles laid out in the Declaration of Independence, those have not necessarily changed. I think what has changed is the larger cultural and political environment in which we find ourselves. So the framers were, of course, very skeptical of mass notions of democracy, people having direct say over the government. A lot of the framers were also skeptical of this idea of political parties, seeing them as basically mere extensions of the masses. But what's happened, of course, ironically, in many respects due to the entire structure of our government, is political parties have formed and have gained a sort of monopoly over the contours of our political system. And that has allowed individual citizens either to opt out of the political process entirely, to outsource the decision-making to elites or activists within those political parties, or frankly become so jaded or even tarnished by the political environment that we surrender our individuality and our individual decision-making for that of the broader group. And I think all of these things could spawn an entirely different sort of conversation, but it is a complicated and complex problem that nevertheless is fairly deeply rooted in our political system.
Yeah, it is complex because alongside the political, there's just the cultural stuff that's happening. things such as we're so caught up, we're so busy, for example. Our
Yes.
lives are so busy, and it's like, okay, where do I find, and we find this with, trying to raise kids and trying to find time to focus on them and their needs and the family unit. But now you're asking me to, on top of that, spend time thinking about what's happening at the local city council.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's a great example. Local city council, local government. In so many ways, the average American is going to be much more not just connected, but affected by what happens in their town, in their city, or even in their neighborhood association. And I would wager that most people, myself included to some extent, can't name their elected officials or their state senators or state representatives. We become so focused on our national political conversation that we tend to ignore the opportunities that we have to affect political outcomes at our local level. And I also want to mention, look, national political conversations matter. The tone coming out of Washington, D.C. and the direction of our country does matter. And at the same time, I do think we neglect the local political conversations and environment at our collective peril. One last thing you mentioned, we're very, very busy as a people. There are some famous studies in my discipline going back to the 1960s that found people's belief systems aren't exactly well thought out or well organized. And it's not because, as some people feared, that we are just unable to govern ourselves, that we are just dumb or disinterested, but rather we're busy. We have other things to take care of. We have other passions to worry about, raising children, working our jobs, going to church, name any other activity that you can think of. But in terms of governing ourselves, this is where I think we as Christians can start to talk about the ordering of our passions and the ordering of our priorities. What does it mean for us to put in the work to seek the flourishing of our communities? And maybe that will take a little more effort, but this is not a responsibility that we should take lightly.
Okay, you just made reference there to a passage in Jeremiah 29. Now, you're part of an organization, or you're affiliated with, what is it, the J29?
J29.
J29.
Yes.
And we're going to get into J29 and Jeremiah 29 as we continue our conversation in just a moment. Thanks for listening to the Reconnect Without Carmen. I'm Paul, and this is Faith Radio.
All right, so you've got a pack of cards. You've heard of a pack of wolves. Maybe you have a backpack. You got a lot of packs in your life. But have you ever gotten a Faith Radio welcome pack? I mean, you might be brand new to Faith Radio, or you might just be new-ish, but either way, if you've never gotten a welcome pack, we'd like to welcome you. So text the word welcome to 877-933-2484 or visit myfaithradio.com and request your very own welcome pack today.
Well, it is graduation season, and maybe you've seen a card, maybe you've heard somebody refer to that passage from Jeremiah 29, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans for hope in the future. Now, when Jeremiah gave that word from the Lord, it was not at the graduation ceremony at Jerusalem Central High School. No, it was to an exiled people that were wanting to return to the land of Israel and renew the kingdom. And God was warning them, no, not for 70 years. And until that time, there's also in Jeremiah 29 the call for us to seek the welfare of the city that we've been exiled to. And it talks about the practical ways. Plant gardens, give your children in marriage, and work for the welfare, pray for the welfare of the nation, yes, the exiled nation you've been sent to. Well, as we continue our conversation as talking about citizens, we got to remember we are dual citizens as Christians. And we're talking with Daniel Bennett, a political scientist, author of the book called Uneasy Citizenship, Embracing the Tension in Faith and Politics. And Daniel, as we mentioned, you're part of an organization called J29 that is seeking to do that. Yes, we live as Christians, we are really in exile here on earth until God's coming kingdom. Just like the children of Israel who were exiled into Babylon, they knew the promise. They knew the promise of the coming kingdom. And in light of that promise, they were called to live a certain way. Now, again, to us as Christians. We're dual citizens. Yes, we're citizens of an earthly country, whether it be the United States, Canada, or you name it. But we are also citizens of God's coming kingdom. And we're supposed to live out certain ways. The question is, how, Daniel? I mean, Jeremiah gave some basic ideas, but here we are, the modern day. As you look at our landscape as a political scientist and also just, again, as a Christian and somebody who thinks deeply about these things, what do you see are opportunities for living out the kingdom as we, living in this kingdom here on earth well as we look toward the coming kingdom?
Well, I think it's going to look different for individual people with different gifts, at different stages of life. I like to think about people in my own congregation, for example. There are opportunities to serve the local church, in different ways when you have several young kids versus when you're retired and your kids have graduated and moved on out of the house. The same could also be said for us in our work as citizens. Maybe you do take it as an important part of your citizenship to attend local political meetings or city council meetings or connecting with the state representative or senator when they come to town. Maybe that just does not fit your schedule as a result of having a young family and being caught up in the day-to-day activities of raising your children well. So maybe that just looks like, being diligent about doing research before you go in to cast a vote. Maybe you do your research well. For those kinds of conversations. As for Jeremiah's general instructions, it's really important to note here, it would have been very easy for God's people to think, we're here temporarily. We believe that God is going to send us back to our promised land. And so we're just going to ignore our community around here. It's not even really our community. We're here not by choice, but we've been taken. The Lord tells them to basically do the exact opposite, right? Really invest in the well-being and flourishing of the community in which you find yourself. And for us as Christians living in the now but not yet, it could be really easy for us to just say, you know what, I'm going to keep our heads down, going to focus inward, build the local church, and ignore everything happening in our midst. There is very little justification for doing that in Scripture, right? We are called to love our neighbors regardless of who they are, to build and support our communities regardless of where we are. And so however that looks for us as individual citizens in our individual capacity, we are at least called to invest in our local communities. It's going to look different from family to family, person to person, but Jeremiah 29:7 says we have to invest in the flourishing and seek the welfare of our neighbors.
I keep seeing it, Daniel, as these are the kingdom values that God put in place at the beginning. And we're supposed to live them out now, not defer it. That's just my thought on that.
No, that's exactly right. And we are, if we believe in the sovereignty of God, and we should, as He is the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent creator, then we should believe that He has placed all of us in our individual capacities and collectively in these positions for a particular time and purpose. We might not see it in our lifetimes. We might not see it in our children's lifetimes. But if we believe in the grand tapestry of God's story, we all have a role to play in one way or another.
Okay, let's switch gears because we looked at opportunities as Christians living out kingdom values now for the benefit of our earthly country. What about some of the threats? I think you've already mentioned a few. We mentioned the fact that we seem already so overwhelmed, where so much of our time is taken by, so many things. But maybe that's the starting point, looking at what are we focusing on our time and what we're valuing.
I mean, one possible threat would be just the continued disintegration of community. Social relationships have frayed. You look at membership in civic organizations or even religious congregations has steadily declined in the United States over the past several decades. The decline of what Robert Putnam, the sociologist from Harvard, termed social capital. This idea that what we have collectively together is shrinking or dissipating. That's a major challenge for us. I think too, just living, especially as Christians who believe in, biblical, small o, orthodox Christian teaching, may continually find ourselves as an outlier or even threat to the broader culture. And, we've seen instances of persecution, certainly historically in the church, even in a contemporary way, persecuted churches around the world. And in the United States, it might not look like Christians are going to jail for what they believe, but it could mean that you're ostracized as a believer. It could mean that you're maybe not, denied an opportunity for a promotion, or maybe your friend groups start to look at you a little strange because of the things that you believe. And so, this may not be, in line with historical persecution of the church, but we still may very well bear a cost for a sort of faithful daily living. Now, as Christians, I think we ought to be faithful to the truth rather than whatever the consequences of that might be. And it doesn't mean we stop fighting for what we believe in, and certainly stop fighting for a more favorable political environment. But it also means that we believe Jesus's words when he told us it's not always going to be easy as people of faith, right? But he encourages his disciples, and he encourages us. In this world you might have troubles, but take heart that I have overcome the world. And so we have we have an example and someone to whom we can turn in those moments. So in general, there's a lot of challenges to a faithful and, I think, confident citizenship. But I think at the end of the day, if we remember, I think Tim Keller said, if we believe that Jesus really did rise from the dead, then everything's going to be okay. We know how the story ends.
Yeah, we do. Well, Daniel, I wish we had more time, because I was thinking about one of the things you touched on, that it's going to look different from one family, one individual, one church to another. I mean, we oftentimes want the program instead of looking at what are the organic things that happen. And I keep going, when I look at during the exile, you had the prophet Daniel, who, we read his book and you think, oh, he was so good or whatever. I keep wondering how some of the exiled Jews, here's this Jewish boy who's working for the evil emperor, and I wonder how many times he got, razzed by people who... Yeah. That's a whole nother discussion, who were the Jewish people thinking, why is he copying, why is he compromising, whatever, and when he was really doing God's work in the situation he was given.
How much time do we have?
None. We're out of time. That's going to be another conversation sometime, Daniel. Maybe you need to write on it. Anyway, Daniel Bennett, again, find his book. It's called Uneasy Citizenship. Again, embracing the tension in faith and politics. If you'd like a link to the book, just hit us up on the text line 877-933-2484. This is The Reconnect, and again, thanks for listening as I fill in for Carmen this week. She's disconnecting for a little while and having time with some family and relaxing. She'll be back a week from today. Talking about connecting. Stay connected with us here at Faith Radio. Yes, you can connect with The Reconnect on our website, myfaithradio.com. Look for the Reconnect with Carmen show page. But as part of being connected to Faith Radio and all that's happening here, wouldn't you like to be one of the first people to know what's going on? Well, there is the Faith Radio newsletter. If you've not signed up for it, it's a great way to stay connected with us, plus get some exclusive newsletter-only giveaways that are coming up. Get on those. So go to myfaithradio.com or text the word CONNECT to 877-933-2484 and sign up for the Faith Radio email newsletter. Well, again, I'm Paul. More to come as we head into hour number 2 of The Reconnect for this Monday. Thanks again for listening to Faith Radio.
Thanks for listening to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. Let us know how we can help you more fully reconnect the eternal with the everyday. We want to walk with you throughout your journey of discipleship, so let's connect. You can text us at 877-933-2484 or connect with us online at myfaithradio.com and on all our social media. I look forward to connecting with you as we each seek to reconnect the eternal with the everyday.